Hi guys. Have you any of you been asked, what'd you do that for? Or why are you doing that? Today, on this week's adventure in redneck archaeology, I am digging up this old hole. Why? Well, because it's something I've always wondered about. This old hole has been here as long as I've been alive. The door opens backwards. It's got adjustments on the front windshield, like it slides up. The hood, it's got a hood, so it seems like this might be the entire car. I asked my dad about it. He didn't know why it was here, how it was here, how long it had been here, where it came from. My brother doesn't. So I was curious. My dad loved the show Oak Island Mysteries. We never watched it to the end. But it was two brothers in search for this buried treasure. It was a mystery. And in former days, that was the way people read. I'll give a post for a book by Peter Struck, about ancient readers and the way they read. And frequently they read for mysteries, for things that didn't quite make sense. Well, we've been working on this stone study together, and a dear pastor friend of mine asked, what's your purpose in this? And it's not a bad question, because for a lot of people who study Scripture too much tend to make it so it's trivial, or study things that aren't important. And the playful activity in looking at Scripture, looking for wonder, the kind of Oak Island mystery of Scripture gets lost, especially in academic readings. So as we continue, I'm not going to get that much done this week. I'm just going to tell you about the little bit I dug up, and then for next week I'll have you maybe look at a couple of things and consider a couple of things, and we'll dig a little bit further. I think eventually this old hulk's going to need the backhoe. But for our rock study, if you remember, it all started in Psalm 62. To the choir master, according to Yedutun, a psalm of David. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be greatly shaken. How long will all of you attack a man to batter him like a leaning wall, a tottering fence? They only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. Selah. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. Upon God rests my salvation and my glory, my mighty rock. My refuge is God. Trust in him at all times. O people, pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. Selah. Those of low estate are but a breath. Those of high estate are a delusion. In the balances they go up. They are altogether lighter than the breath. Put no trust in extortion. Set no hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God, and that to you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love, for you will render to a man according to his work. Like we talked about last week, there is a lot of metaphor in this passage. Like a stone, the Lord is heavy. Again, that's a play on the word for honor, pervade. The Lord is unshakable, right? Like a rock, he was stable. Contrary to man, the Lord doesn't change. He doesn't pass away. He is solid. Man is like a breath that passes away. That's really all we needed to write a sermon or a devotion, to say, that's the metaphor, this is God, these are the things we need to remember about God, and ta-da, we're done. Right? But that's not where we finish digging. If we keep looking in Scripture, Psalm 32 is another example of this apparent metaphor of rock. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity. Just and upright is he. That's Deuteronomy 32:4. But Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. That's Deuteronomy 32:15. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you. You forgot the rock who gave you birth. That's Deuteronomy 32:18. The cows are photobombing. You should look at this. 15. How could one chase 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight unless their God had sold them and the Lord had given them up? For their rock is not as our rock. Our enemies are by themselves. Now what I want you to notice here is all of the imagery we saw in the first one about being heavy, being unchangeable, being all the things that are like a rock. Here we don't have any of that metaphorical imagery, right? In the first place, the rock, his work is perfect. Like, do you think of rocks as being perfect? Is that the first thing you think of? The next, scoffed at the rock of his salvation. Do you think of running to a rock to be saved? Not normal. Unmindful of the rock that bore you, Deuteronomy 32:18. Do we think of rocks in childbirth? Unless their rock had sold them, 32:30 and 31. For their rock is not as our rock. All of these places, you can safely take out the word rock and basically put in the word God. Jewish scholar Maimonides, that's what he said this is. He said that rock here is an equivocation for God. Equivocation meaning a substitution of one word for another. In linguistic terms, you could call it polysemy, or antomazia, which is different naming, or possibly metalepsis. We'll talk more about that down the road, and we may not use those words to talk about it. So at least I have an audience of 2, 3 with my camera on. The interesting thing about metaphor here, especially with Deuteronomy 32, I looked up every occurrence of this word rock, sur, in Hebrew, in all of the Old Testament. And the metaphorical uses far outweigh the literal usages of this word. And of those metaphorical uses, these usages that are equivocation, places where you can take out the word rock and put in the word God, those are a fair portion of the metaphorical uses. And then I looked at the early versions. Around from the 5th to the 1st century, we have the Aramaic translation of the Old Testament. If you remember, in the book of Ezra, he reads the law aloud to the people, but the people can't understand because the scriptures are in Hebrew. So there has to be a translation for the people who only are understanding Aramaic. That is probably the beginning of the formation of Aramaic pardon, and that continued right up to the 1st century. From the 3rd century up to the time of Christ, that was the generation of what's known as the Septuagint, the 70, or the Greek translation of Scripture. Both the Aramaic translation and the Greek translation refuse to translate metaphorical utterances about God as being a rock. They really don't like it. In Deuteronomy 32, every time it says God is a rock, or my rock, Aramaic translates the word for strength, tikot. Every time that word occurs in Greek, in the Greek translation, they always translate it as God. In all of the other occurrences in the Old Testament, this word tikot in Aramaic nearly always translates God is my rock, or rock of my salvation, or anywhere this metaphor of God as a rock occurs. Aramaic avoids it. Greek avoids it. So by the time we get to the 5th century, before Christ, or thereabouts, somewhere between the fifth and the third, we have an avoidance for this metaphor of God is my rock, or the rock of my salvation, or any idea of God being a rock. Well, this raises two questions. The first question is, well, why would they start avoiding this metaphor that's clearly in Scripture? It's 70 plus occurrences. Why would they suddenly stop using this metaphor? Why would they start avoiding it? Right now, and I haven't verified this hypothesis yet, right now I think that it's because stone gods, or gods of rock and stone, are basically equated with idols, beginning in Deuteronomy. Here in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64. And there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known. Now, it's a different word for rock than stone. It's the word Evan. But this equation of God of stone, God of rock, by the time we move along, that could be the reason why the Jews no longer like this metaphor of God is my rock. The next question, though, and this is one I'm going to leave you with for next week, and one that I'm still digging into. I will try to find out why we stopped seeing this metaphor in Scripture. But the other question is, why did they start using the metaphor of God is a rock to begin with? Right? If you think about it in Scripture, there are different events that happen. So if you remember in Genesis, Jacob up toward the Jabbok, he meets a man in the middle of the night. He wrestles with that man, this angel, until eventually the angel, or this man, says to Jacob, "You need to let me go. It's dawning." And Jacob says, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." And so basically the angel, the man, touches Jacob's hip. It's dislocated. He limps. And his name changes from Jacob to Yisrael, meaning he has wrestled with God. That name, right, is rooted in that metaphor. Where does this idea of the metaphor of my God is a rock, where does it come from? Does it come from, for instance, when they're wandering in the wilderness, and the stone in the wilderness that Moses is supposed to speak to, and he strikes with his staff? Is that where this rock metaphor comes from? Is it earlier, when Jacob is at Bethlehem? He doesn't realize that God is in this place, and he sees the angel descending and descending on the ladder of heaven. Is that where the metaphor comes from? I'd be interested in seeing what you guys come up with. Where you think the metaphor of God as a rock, where it is rooted in the Old Testament, or for that matter, it may be in the ancient Near East. I'm still trying to call in favors from some of my ancient Near East nerd friends to see if they know is there something else in the ancient Near East that would basically show a greater antiquity, that would move us further back in time, and the Israelites are basically recalling this distant memory of God as a rock.